Hello, everyone, and welcome into CrushTheStreet.com. I got a new guest for Crush the Street, actually. You might be familiar with him because he is a big name. His name's Jeff Berwick. He is with the Dollar Vigilante. He's a libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, freedom fighter against mankind's two biggest enemies, the state and the central banks. Jeff Berwick, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Ken. It's great to be on with you.
Jeff, let's start off here. You know, you're a thinking man. You do a lot of research, and you even had some experience with this. And I'll start off with this. What is the ideal society and ideal government that if we could wipe the slate clean with what we have, what would it look like? And would people be happy with it 200 years from now? And I guess my question is, you know, government today, especially in the alternative media, has become such a curse word. But if we were to go somewhere else and, you know, have 20 of us there, we would probably organize. Call it government, if you will. But what would we do to set it up so that 200 years from now, you know, the people would be happy, their liberties would be protected, and the economy would grow? Any thoughts on this?
Oh, yeah, I've got more than a few thoughts on it. As far as, you know, if you had 20 people who went to a place, we'd organize. Of course we would. People always organize. That has nothing to do with government. Government has nothing to do with organization. Government, for example, if you had those 20 people on an island, let's say, and they all decided to do their own things, but they got together every now and then and just said, hey, you know, we should all get together and build this or do that. No problem. That's great. And I wouldn't call that government because that's all voluntary. The difference between that and government is if one of the people on the island said, all 19 of you owe me money and I'm going to decide what to do with it for the good of you guys. And that's essentially what government is. And if that person uses violence, which of course it would have to pretty much if the people didn't want to do it, and if the people wanted to do it, he wouldn't have to do it in the first place. That's what government is. They're essentially using violence to rule people. The word government, in fact, is just old Latin word, govern, which is control, and mente, which is mind. It's mind control. And it's actually archaic. I don't think we've ever really needed it, but so you could make the case that, you know, I don't know all of human history. I guess at some point, maybe it was necessary for something. I'm not sure. But it's definitely archaic in today's age. Well, first of all, it's just highly immoral and violent. That's the worst part about it. And we just don't need anything like that. And even if we do have things like government, this is some of the things that I've been thinking about lately. Just thinking about, well, with the government, let's look at the US today. With the government they have today, why don't they at least let every single American, they have everyone in data banks already at the NSA. They know everything about every single person. Why don't they let every single person vote on all these bills that go through Congress? Why do they have to elect a person? And this is the craziest part to me. So that every 4 years or so, or 2 years for whatever, a guy goes up there and makes a bunch of promises, and then people put an X mark on a piece of paper, and then the guy goes off and just does whatever he wants and usually doesn't keep those promises. And then every time, oh, I hate this, I'm going to vote in the next guy. And it's a ridiculous system, even under its own system. Like, why don't they just have direct democracy at the very least? Even though I think it'd still be a disaster because 90% of people are complete idiots. And so if you put on the ballot, let's give everyone $1 million, everyone would vote for it. And then there'd be no $1 million, and then they print up the money, and then there'd be hyperinflation. So anytime you have government, it's usually a disaster, and it's even more of a disaster today, as we can see. And that's why, as you mentioned, almost everyone thinks of government as a dirty word, and they should. Government is evil.
Yeah, you know, and I totally agree, and I guess I'm playing devil's advocate here just to pick your brain. But if we did go back to that, you know, it doesn't need to be 20 people, but maybe a society where there's an actual city. Is it best just to have a Wild West scenario and allow the free market to kind of organize itself where, you know, if someone wants to start a business, let's say, and then the competitor across the street starts one, the most extreme scenario would be I don't like him, he's cutting into my profits, I'm going to go shoot him. So right now, the government kind of protects that situation. You can say that to a certain extent. How would the free market or an ideal system kind of protect people's liberties in that extreme?
Well, you brought up the word Wild West, and the government and the media for a long time have been trying to use that word to sort of mean that it's crazy and everyone gets shot and killed. But actually, the Wild West was actually very good, and that's what there was a ton of growth in the U.S. because of it, because you didn't have to go to government to go get your permit to do anything. You just did it. And as far as having governments, you mentioned having in the city, that I'd actually support that. For example, I'm actually one of the biggest American patriots out there in the fact that I don't think there should be a federal government. That was how the U.S. was initially set up. It was initially set up as different colonies. That's why they're called the United States. I now call it the United State because it's just one big, giant government that controls everything. So a person like me, an anarcho-capitalist, I would like to see, instead of having, for example, in the world today, we have about 200 federal governments, and then we have all the state governments and municipal governments and all that sort of a thing. But if you just take the 200 federal governments, what they're trying to do right now is work towards a one world government. That's definitely the plan. You can see it in action. The European Union was part of that progression towards that. So they're trying to work to less and less governments. Whereas as an anarcho-capitalist, I'd like to see the world move more and more governments. So I'd like to see, for example, in the US, go back to 50 states and no federal government, nothing, absolutely no federal government, 50 different states. And then once that goes really well, which it would, it'd go much better than it is today. Then go to every city's its own state. And then pretty much after that, everyone will go, oh, this is even better. And then pretty soon people go, why do we even have this anymore? And so I'd like to see just more and more governments till we get to about 7 billion governments on Earth, which would make the opening of the Olympics even more tedious and long than it is now. But I think it'd be worth it. And as far as your point about what it'd be like, there is places, for example, in China, there's this place called that people refer to as being the anarchic city. There's absolutely no government there. The federal government has really no control of anything that happens there, and it's been booming. It's actually one of the most successful cities in China. I forget the name because they all have weird names, but you can look it up. But the government is just a dead hand on the market. And as far as going across the street and shooting your competitor, sure, that could happen. That happens today with government. And then sometimes that person does get put into a cage because of it. People think, oh, that would happen a lot more without it. I don't think it would happen much more. People would have private security. There'd be private courts and private law, essentially. So if you had to open a business, you have a hardware store, and then a guy opens a hardware store across the street. If you go over and kill him, you're going to not have a lot of people in that community who really want to go to your hardware store anymore. Right. They could be like, that guy just killed the guy across the street because he didn't want the competition. What a jerk. I'm not going to his store. Let the market work it out for itself in those terms. I think what government's been really successful at over the last 100 years is convincing a lot of people that we need them. And that's what they're always trying to do. That's what the Barack Obama State of the Union address is all about, is that, we need this big, giant bureaucracy to control you and take half your money every year. Otherwise, if we didn't do that, then there'd be other people who might take some of your money every year, robbers. But even in the U.S. today, it's degraded to the point now that the police actually steal more than private criminals now. The asset forfeiture laws, U.S. police stole more from American citizens last year illegally, legally under their own fake laws, than actual private criminals. And then that doesn't even include the government, which takes about half of everyone's money in taxes. So if you're asking me what would be better than that, anything.
Oh, no, I totally agree with you. And, I love, talking to people, because when it comes to people advocating for more government, they don't understand that the free market will fulfill the need wherever there is a need, even like the FDA or, going to restaurants and companies having an A or B or C. People act like that's just an answer to the government. But why wouldn't a private business do that? Why can't they, if you want to be a good restaurant, you go out and hire a company to come audit your business and you get their stamp of approval. It's not just the government that can answer these different things. So,
well, when you're looking at a restaurant, who actually goes and looks up to see if they've got their government permission, their health certificate from the government? You go to Yelp, and it's free. And if it gets like no stars, you don't go there. The market works it out all so much better. You look at how the government does it, and they send around all these bureaucrats to all these places and just harass people and make them do all sorts of top-down, central plan controlled sort of things, which actually makes it now. So in the U.S., and it was John Stossel of Fox who did the little test of this, he decided to try to open a lemonade stand legally in the U.S., and he found out it took weeks to get all the permits, and I think he said the total cost ended up being $40,000.
Oh, wow. Wow. All right, Jeff. Well, we got the markets are going crazy. 2016 is looking to be a year of a lot of excesses in the system, coming down. What are your thoughts? I know you've talked about 2016 being a year, and so have other as a year where we could see the collapse scenario play out. What do you see, and what do you see happening in 2016 as a result of the craziness and the excesses and the big governments and the agendas, all kind of culminating now here in this year?
Yeah, well, I've been saying actually since the summer of 2015 that there'd be a collapse that would start in the fall, and that happened completely. It happened actually a couple weeks early in late August, when you just look at any stock market chart of almost any stock market in the world, and you can see this massive drop that happened in August. And then what I said after that is that if we don't continue to have this collapse, so if there is a rebound that goes through to, say, the end of the year, 2016 will be a complete bloodbath, and it's now just nearly the end of January, and it's already pretty much been a bloodbath all around the world. As you know, the markets have just been unbelievably bad. The worst start to markets, I think, in history to start the year. And of course, there's something called the January effect that many traders are well aware of. And what it says is that what happens in January usually goes on to happen for the rest of the year. And it's not always that case, but it actually is statistically is quite common. And so if that's the case, then this year is going to be incredibly bad, and that's what I've been predicting. The reason why it goes way back, it actually goes back to 1913 with the founding of the Federal Reserve, which was a corporate private banker takeover of the government of the U.S. and still is in place today. And things have really just been downhill since then. Things really went off the rails in 1971 when they took the gold backing away from the dollar, and I think that's where we're reaching the final end stages of that now.
Jeff, is this somewhat controlled, or is this what we're seeing in these markets? It all just kind of bursting at the seams. Is this part of some sort of new world order in terms of the elites allowing this to crash, or is it just it getting to the point where it's unmanageable?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's a question I ask all the time, is this actually planned? Because if you look at every single thing that the Federal Reserve is doing, every central bank, every major central bank, the European Central Bank, Bank of International Settlements, the IMF, if you look at what the U.S. government's doing, just destroying business almost any way it possibly can, it looks like if they had a plan to actually destroy the U.S. and pretty much the entire Western economy, and by that reasoning, pretty much the entire world economy, they're doing an amazing job of it, but it's always hard to tell if it's actually planned, or is this just the inevitable end of all these incredibly stupid, and I mean stupid in the dictionary definition term, or the definition in the dictionary of stupid, which means a tendency towards self-destruction, incredibly stupid policies and things that they've been doing now for decades. As I pointed out, this really started to get bad in 1971. Of course, these things have a long time frame. So in August 15, 1971, when Richard Nixon temporarily removed the gold backing away from the dollar, that actually put the entire world on a fiat currency system that nearly collapsed at the end of the 1980s. And the only reason it didn't is because the governments, which are now almost all fascists, communist, almost tyrannical governments all around the world, which are also democracies, which is even worse. So they've now gathered so much debt since 1971 and since 1980 specifically that now this thing is just nearing the end. The U.S. government has doubled its national debt since the last financial crisis in 2008. So Barack Obama, since he's been in office, has put the federal government into more debt than every other president all the way back to Washington. All those criminals, he's put them all into debt, into more debt than all those people combined.
Wow.
And it's just escalating now. We just saw the budget office of the Congressional Budget Office, I believe they call it, say that in the next decade, the federal debt will go well over $30 trillion. And I think that's a highly, highly optimistic outlook based on the numbers. So this thing is reaching hockey stick sort of levels in almost every respect. And it's going to collapse. It absolutely is. And it's just how it collapses. And that's the real question. And the stock markets, some of them around the world, China certainly has been ahead of the curve a little bit, but the stock markets in the U.S. still haven't fully realized what's going on. I think they still pay attention to Janet Yellen, who says, oh, it's getting better, or Barack Obama, who says you're peddling fiction if you say the American economy is in decline, and watching CNBC and just thinking, oh, I think we're just going to muddle through and get through, the economy is going to recover. There's absolutely no chance of that happening. If you just look, if you know the numbers, the real numbers, not the numbers the government puts out, those like the employment numbers, they say the employment's at 5%, but if it was just calculated the way they did in the 1990s, it's around over 20%. The amount of people in the workforce, if you just look at this, these are government statistics, but this one's actually more correct, is that it's there's less people in the workforce now than has been since, I believe, the 1980s on a percentage basis. So that's a much better statistic. If you look at the debt stats, everyone's, not only governments, but people have gone more in debt. There's a giant debt bubble. And of course, we have interest rates at or near 0%, and even negative interest rates, which is complete Keynesian Kool-Aid drinking insanity in Europe. And the reason is because there's so much debt. So if interest rates even rose a few percent, this whole game is over. So we're really near the end of the system.
Jeff, is it fair to say that the whole world is dealing with the same problem? Like we're all in it together?
Well, you could say that in a sense. Definitely what happens in the West, which is going to be ground zero for this economic collapse, and the U.S. Europe is going to be a complete disaster. It already is. They just had banks closing in Italy last week. Of course, Greece has had all its banks closed for a long time. Cyprus had its bank bail-ins in 2013. I said that's going to happen all throughout Europe. So we're going to see, these things, everything's so interconnected in the world today that if Europe and the U.S. go down, and they will, they absolutely will, they'll take pretty much everything else with it for a period of time, absolutely. And so it's going to be dangerous almost anywhere.
So, I mean, in like the stock market, for instance, if one company does bad, that company can go to zero, people move to the next company. But, when you're talking about a global economy collapsing, there's no other option. Everyone's stuck in their position in that sense. So, and I guess that's the dynamic that we're dealing. That's why the U.S. has been able to maintain its position for so long. There's no way to truly opt out. Or in any easy way. And I guess, what are your thoughts on the dollar going forward in 2016? If we see markets crash, do you see the dollar actually strengthening here in the short term?
Well, when you talk about opting out, there actually is ways to opt out. You can get all your money outside of the financial system and outside of fiat currencies. Get them into precious metals, gold, silver. Get it into Bitcoin. Not a huge amount of your money, because Bitcoin is still only 7 years old now, so it's very young. But
the mass population isn't going to do that.
Well, they should. Why don't they? Because they watch their television programming. It's called programming for a reason. They should be watching your program or many others like it. So yeah, a lot of people are going to get hurt. But the good thing is most people are so impoverished now that they have nothing to lose. So when things get really bad, they're just going to not have anything again. So, I don't mean to joke at them, but it really is the case that this system has impoverished so many people that when the system collapses, most people have nothing left to lose anyway. Most people in the U.S. don't have anything. They just have debt. So even if the system collapses, it actually could be a good thing for a fair amount of people, in that a lot of that debt may go away in this complete total collapse. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting as far as getting into Bitcoin and things like that. People should be looking into these things. So you have to start moving to get outside of the financial system now, because it's just going to get worse and worse. And now what we're seeing is they're moving towards a war on cash. They're trying to get rid of all cash, and they're doing a really good job of it, especially in Europe. In Denmark and Sweden and Norway, they've almost gotten rid of cash completely. And this is a big part of their move to go to negative interest rates, because what happened was when they first came up with this crazy idea a couple of years ago to go to negative interest rates, there was a Swiss fund manager who had something like $10 billion in a Swiss bank. And when he heard that he was going to be paying 0.5% interest rate every year, which do the math, I went to government public indoctrination camps. I can't do it in my head, but I think it was around like 5 million or 50 million a year he'd be paying in interest just to keep the money in the bank. And so he said he was going to withdraw all the cash, and the bank wouldn't let him. And now they put in all these things where they are trying to get rid of cash, so people are stuck in the system. But there, like I said, there is still ways around it, but they're going to be running out soon. I think it'll be almost impossible to buy physical gold or silver in the next few years in exchange for fiat currency. Same with Bitcoin, but you can still now. So there is still an opportunity to opt out of this system. It's going to be fairly bad, but there's always going to be pockets of things happening. There's always opportunities. I would just get away from the main sort of areas that aren't ready or prepared whatsoever for this collapse, and that is mostly the U.S. American people have been so propagandized for decades through the media and all the movies telling them they live in the freest country in the world, which it absolutely is not, and the best country and the richest country, which is not. It's the most indebted country in human history, the government at least. And so a lot of people seem to think that nothing bad could ever happen in the U.S., and so many people now are so dependent on the government, which is all a part of a plan that they've been having for decades. So there's 50 million people on food stamps, for example, in the U.S. That's 1 out of every 6 people, or 1 in every 4 kids in the U.S. is on food stamps. So this is like a complete third world country. So once that all ends, and it's just going to be, a lot of people there are just going, they won't even know what to do. It's going to be, that's why the military and what they ran last year, Jade Helm, putting the military all throughout the U.S., tanks and all sorts of military equipment, they've said this for a number of years. They're preparing for civil unrest, and there will be once this all collapses.
Jeff, one of the things you brought up is the system, the people in power taking away cash, circulating cash. And I'm always curious as to what their next step is going to be to hold everything together. And that made a lot of sense because, we've seen interest rates, continuing to drop. We've seen them do things like QE, but taking cash away from people and it all going to some sort of digital system, a cashless society. That's something I haven't really considered in terms of the next thing they can do that's beyond negative interest rates, that's beyond QE. I mean, is there anything else that the central banks could resort to continue to control the people and keep them locked in to the system that we have?
Well, really, the central banks are running out of options. And I think what we're going to see, especially in the U.S., because of the federal government is so bankrupt now, is that they're going to start to confiscate more and more funds. We're going to see things like IRAs and 401ks. They've already talked about this. They don't keep a lot of this stuff secret. They've been talking about wanting to move them all into a government-managed IRA 401k fund, which only invests in U.S. treasuries. And that's because hardly anyone's outside of the U.S. or the Federal Reserve, especially the Federal Reserve, is buying U.S. treasuries. China's been a net seller. Russia's been a net seller. Everyone's a net seller almost. So the Treasury's been buying them up. And there really isn't a lot of buyers out there for them anymore. So what they'll do next is nationalize IRAs and 401ks. And there's literally trillions of dollars in there that haven't been taxed yet. So that's ripe funds for the picking. working, and they'll force them into treasuries. So that'll keep it alive a little while longer. But what we'll see then is they'll probably move to negative interest rates. So then people will be in treasuries that will be paying 3 to 5% a year, that they'll be paying the governments to lend them money, and they can't take it out. So they'll be losing 3-5%, whatever the number is on that. And then they'll also be losing on the inflation, which they'll also be doing, which is continuing ongoing quantitative easing to keep the system alive. So the inflation for even right now is it's around 8%, I believe, actual money printing going on. The U.S. government, of course, if you pay attention to their statistics, which are totally massaged and totally manipulated, I think it says it's under 2%, but realistically, it's around 8% right now. So even if you just say 10% as a round number, if they force you into these treasuries, which they will, this is going to happen, you'll be losing a few percent to the negative interest rates every year, and you'll be losing about 10% or more to inflation every year. So you'll be down 12-15% every year. It doesn't take too long before you'll still have the same amount of money in your IRA or 401k account. You'll still have that $100,000 10 years from now, but that $100,000 will probably buy you a nice dinner at a good restaurant. So yeah, this is where it's all headed, and people need to be paying attention to this. And for people who do, by the way, want to get out of their 401ks or IRAs and actually put them, not actually cash them in, but get them offshore or internationalize them, you can actually buy precious metals with your IRA, but they have to be something called a self-directed IRA, and that's something we do at tdvoffshore.com. That's the Dollar Vigilante offshore.com. Just some of the services that we offer to try to help people protect themselves before this collapse.
Yeah, Jeff, I wanted to definitely give you an opportunity to share a little more about what people can do to learn more about you. I know you have an event coming up here in February. You want to share a little bit about that?
Absolutely. We're having our Dollar Vigilante Internationalization and Investment Summit coming up on February 18th in Acapulco, Mexico. And the next day, we actually have the world's largest anarcho-capitalist conference, February 19th to 21st, called Anarchapulco, hard to spell, ANARCHAPULCO.com, I believe. But if you just Google it, you'll find it. These are the people building the next, what's the next world's going to be. They're already creating solutions for once the governments and the central banks collapse, which will be great, by the way. A lot of people talk about this coming collapse like it's going to be the worst thing ever. If you're prepared, it's going to be bad. It's absolutely going to be chaotic, and a lot of people are going to get hurt. But it's good to get rid of this totally horrible system that's been controlling humanity so much and free up the free market so we can go on to a much more peaceful and prosperous world with hopefully one day 7 billion governments.
And if people want to reach out to you and learn more about, what your offer in terms of your services, where would they go and what would they find?
I would just say, just go to dollarvigilante.com. I write almost a daily blog on there. I've been really focused. I decided last year, actually I started the Dollar Vigilante in 2009, right after the 2008 collapse, because I was expecting the 2008 collapse. And when it happened, I knew I was right about what was happening. And so I decided to start the Dollar Vigilante then to start to get people prepared. And I said it'd be 5 to 10 years before it starts to collapse. So that's 2015 to 2020. We've already entered into that period. And so that's why I started the Dollar Vigilante, and I forgot where I was going to go with why I started it, but essentially, because the next collapse is coming. So that's why I've been really focused on. I've been working. I'm literally working 18 hours a day. I quit drinking a long time ago. I quit everything. I started getting back into shape. I actually told my subscribers to do so as well. I said these coming years is going to be very, very difficult, and you have to be right on top of your game. You have to be paying attention, or you could, and I don't want to sound like a scaremonger here, but you literally could lose everything. And if you're paying attention, you could actually do incredibly well. This is going to be a generational change in wealth, which happens quite rarely in human history. It's going to be a potential for that sort of a change, because so many people are going to lose so much in this coming collapse, and the people who are really paying attention and have prepared for it are going to gain a lot from it. But I tell most people, don't be trying to become super wealthy out of this collapse. The big thing is mostly just to survive it and to keep what you have now is really, if you can do that, you're going to be way ahead of the game.
Jeff, that's incredible advice. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your knowledge and research with us. Thanks for coming on the show, Jeff.
My pleasure, Kenneth. Always a pleasure.
You have all the major central banks, Japan, UK, Europe, America, all printing staggering amounts of money. The people who are getting that money, Jeff, are very happy, and their friends are very happy.
I believe in 2020 that we will be back into a rip-roaring, snorting bull market.
They may increase interest rates by 0.25% to kind of prove to the world how responsible they are.
Government is always mankind's biggest enemy throughout human history. It always has been. It's what destroyed Rome. It's what every empire has collapsed, and every war and all the billions of people have been killed. It's all due to government. So it is always our enemy.